Three, two, one, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian the Rain Man Lucas. Welcome to Rain Man's Take, observations on the world we live in. We're going to take a deeper dive into topics of interest to me, including politics, current events, history, popular culture, and social issues. You'll find the diversity of topics refreshing. In our clickbait, soundbite society, we rarely get the whole story. Rain Man's Take interviews interesting people as well as peeling back the onion on specific topics, all with the goal of getting people to think more deeply about a subject. 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody, it's the Rain Man. Want to introduce my guests today, Miss Dao Spencer and her daughter, Kim Spencer. How you guys doing?
Fine.
Great.
Good. So the reason why I wanted to have Dao on, last fall, my wife and I took an amazing trip, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and kind of as a history buff, one of the things that really fascinated me, especially about Vietnam, was just how far that country and how fast that country has come since we lifted the embargo. I think sometime in the mid '90s under Clinton, and just kind of watching and talking to Vietnamese people about what it was like before that, and then what I saw how Vietnam looks now after that embargo, and so that has always been fascinating for me, obviously for a lot of reasons, being a former Marine Corps officer. But I realized that I actually know somebody who's an expert in this stuff. And so I wanted to get her take on Vietnam, what it was like from her childhood all the way through now. So Dao, that's the reason why I wanted to have you on. How you doing?
Well, fine, thank you.
Good. I'll tell you what, let's start from the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your childhood, where in Vietnam you grew up, and then how'd you make your way to the States?
Well, it's a long story. I was born in South Vietnam in the 1930s. At the time, Vietnam was divided into three parts, North, they call it Tonkin. Central part is Annam, and South Cochinchina. And I was born in Cochinchina. That's the southeast part of Vietnam. It's very tropical. And all three, we were under the French since the late 1800s. The difference between the three parts, and I think that when people talk about Vietnam, there is not mention about the difference, because although we were under the French, Cochinchina, Vietnam, in South Vietnam, is part of a colony. Annam and North Vietnam, Tonkin, under the French colonial services protectorate. So there's two different political system, although people don't know the difference. But in the South, we were totally under the French government. And in central Vietnam, in Annam, we have the emperor. And also he governed Annam and Tonkin, and they have more Vietnamese bureaucracy and more tradition than us in South Vietnam, because we are just under the French colony. So although people talk about Vietnam, they don't see the difference in the political system between South Vietnam and the other two parts of Vietnam. In the two parts of Vietnam, Annam and Tonkin, the French were present, were the boss, but there are also Vietnamese bureaucracy there. So they grow up, the people live there as maintain more Vietnamese tradition. Whereas we in the South, we have to be as much French as possible. And that's a big difference that people did not mention or did not specify.
So you went in the South, you went to European style schools and
that's right, because psychology, to live in the South, you have to try to be as French as possible. That's the way to get ahead.
Right. Right.
Otherwise, you just subject your peasants and, you just don't go anywhere. Where in the central Vietnam and in North Vietnam, in Hanoi, there's still the Vietnamese culture that maintain. In the South, we just try to forget about Vietnamese. So you have to be as much French as possible,
Yeah.
and you have to be yellow bananas, yellow outside and white inside.
Yeah. And was it,
Can I just add something to that?
sure.
Brian, just a personal thing, Mom, for you. For instance, all of the children going to your school, Marie Curie, they all had to adopt French names. So they weren't allowed to keep their Vietnamese name. I think you refused, right? Or
No, I have to, but you see, my name is Daos, start with a D. So my mother tried a French name that start with a D, so that would not be too different. So at the lycée, I always call Danielle Dao.
Danielle, I know what it is. So she did it during school, but after all of your cousins grew up, and almost all of them kept their French names. So we have an Aunt Nicole, Uncle Antoine, Uncle Andre, but you didn't keep. Nobody's ever called you Danielle since then. No.
I don't look like a Danielle.
And then the other thing about that you often say, Mom, is about how you didn't learn any Vietnamese history in school, right?
Well, because I went to a French public school in Saigon, and it is the preferred school for South Vietnamese because you learn perfect French accent.
Yeah.
You learn about French history, geography, everything. You learn English, you learn math, Latin, Greek, and so on, a typical French curriculum. The teachers come from France to teach and then go back to France during the summer. So you try to get a very good French accent, Parisian if possible.
And when throughout the population of the South, was it the kind of the working class or middle class and up? They had to kind of incorporate into the French system, and then the peasants and the poor kind of were left by themselves and kind of left on their own, or was everybody across the board supposed to be French?
Well, the people who working in office, they have to learn to speak French, have the bosses in France and so on. And that's the way it is. Then the people who live in the village, it's just peasants, so they don't have French in school.
Yeah.
They're lucky if they learn how to read and write and cultivate the rice fields and plantations.
Right.
The French request when they help Vietnam, the emperor who requests their help to fight the other rebellion in the north and central, that the French request that the emperor would cede the south to them so they can make a colony. Yeah. Whereas the central part, this country still retain some authority through the Mandarin. Although the French still have the final word, but still there is a Vietnamese presence.
Yeah.
So we, in the middle upper class in South Vietnam, to get ahead, we have to try to be as French as possible. We adopt the post custom, of course, try to learn French very well and so on. So I was sent to a French school because that's the best school in Saigon.
And if I remember correctly, the Ho Chi Minh actually was working in Paris, and then he basically came back to Vietnam, obviously settled in the north, and then that's where they kind of started to actively resist against the French. Is that right?
It doesn't start by Ho Chi Minh. He was one of the things, but there are some people in the South, few, who also wish to be independent from France, but you can't do anything because the police would, if you start a movement, something, you will end up in prison fast. so that Ho Chi Minh came to know later on in my childhood. But forget, Ho Chi Minh was in New York. He lived in Harlem.
Really?
Yeah, he knows America before he went to France and Russia and so on. So he tried to find place to get independence, whatever he could. But we, at the time when I grew up, I didn't hear about Ho Chi Minh until much later. Yeah.
That's
Because for the South, it's not allowed to talk independence,
That's amazing.
You have to be grateful to have the French colonial.
And did all of your family live in the South, or did you actually have family in the North as well?
Yeah, we are in the South, and
okay.
a little bit like in United States, but not as strong. We don't want Northerners.
Can I just back up to a couple of things, Mom? So, because this was really interesting for me, Brian, this stuff about Ho Chi Minh first trying to get support from the US, right? I mean, I just want that to be clear, because that was news to me in my later adult life, that he first asked the US for support, and when we refused to give it, would not support this country trying to gain independence from the colonizer,
right?
Ironic for me, they turned to a communist country that could arm them and would support them to get independence from the oppressor, or whatever the colonizer. And that to me was a big revelation.
Yeah, and I remember learning about that as well when we were over there. And that was, he went to the UN trying to plead his case, and obviously now you're starting to get into the great chess game, which is the global politics. But yeah, I mean, America, are they going to go against their French ally, or so it's, and so when you look at it that way, the guy Ho Chi Minh really had no other choice, and it's fascinating. And this is actually very interesting, Dao. I interviewed about maybe 5 episodes ago a gentleman named Joe Connell, who's an author, and he writes a lot about kind of Irish history within the last 100 years, from their War of Independence in 1916 through 1921, then kind of all the way through. And it's fascinating because one of the things that people talk about is, and I think even Ho Chi Minh at one point had mentioned this, that they sort of modeled what they were doing in Vietnam after what the Irish tried to do with the English in the in the 1960s and early 1920s. So because he was over in Europe at that time, and so he's seeing all this kind of take place. And so once he was kind of out on his own, nobody seemed to want to help him. So there's a fascinating parallel there about that.
But Ho Chi Minh also, we call them Uncle Ho.
Yeah,
he was not a communist society. He wanted independence from France. So the communism come much later because he had no collaboration, the French still in Vietnam. And he tried to get other people help, other European, but nobody helped. So he went to Russia and China.
Yep.
So that's the way that independence and communism is one way for him to get help.
Right.
And so, but we still call him Uncle Ho.
Yeah.
He's not a terrible bad guy. The people around him really bad.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the one thing that I've definitely learned as an adult, especially with all the military kind of history I've been taught and I've read, is one man's freedom fighter is the other one's terrorist, and you can say that across the board with anybody. Just happens to be which side you're on.
Right. No, this is something I think, Mom, I just want to bring this out. I'm not sure, Brian, when you'd get to it, but this I think was something that's really unusual about Mom, is that she you grew up under the threat of the communist guerrillas, right? That they were in the jungle threatening your family, killing family members. You were watching bodies going down the river tied together, and like needing to strap money belts on at night for fear that the communists were going to come out of the jungle and like raid the house and all that stuff. And yet decades later, in spite of all that fear about the communists, you were really instrumental in helping to repair the relations, because you recognized them as freedom fighters. Even though you were one of the threatened families, you recognized them as freedom fighters, and then wanted to support them, right? Wanted to, support your people, even though they were under that regime. You might not have agreed with the regime, but you understood why they did that.
Yeah. And that's,
yeah, we in the South, during World War II, the Japanese invade Vietnam, took over the French, expelled the French, and so then when the Japanese lost, the French came back, but they have difficulty, and the independence movement gets stronger. There are more parties, political parties, to try to follow Ho Chi Minh and others who want the independence for Vietnam. So it is complicated, and Ho Chi Minh could not, he need to have more friends, and being a little guy in a small country.
Yeah.
And the French are
sandwiched
big
between,
guys,
being sandwiched between the big guys. Yeah.
In his search for other. But my family was victim of the Vietnamese communists, because my grandfather was a well-respected person in the province, and the French gave him an honorary title to take care of his number of community, because he was a good man.
Yeah. So your grandfather was he high up in the French?
In this little town where we live, on the branch of the Mekong River, and he was very well respected. But at the time when the French came back, and there were different Vietnamese political parties to vie to to take care of the French, to fight the French.
Right.
And so the communists become dominant. They try to eliminate other parties. So they would try to eliminate all the leaders in communities. And my grandfather was one of the people that was a victim. And they kidnapped him and drowned him in a rice field. And he was kidnapped when he went on a boat to inspect some villages. And so they took him. But the two men who drove him to get to that place were taken prisoner. And we didn't know, we didn't find their bodies. And so, and a few days later, they show up in our house. They say they were hidden by the communists.
Really?
On the trees.
Wow.
But the interest, and so we were able to find his body and brought home.
And what year was that?
I was in Saigon at the lycée, so late 40s.
Okay.
Or, maybe near 50s.
Okay. So you're basically you're almost 20 years old, or in your early 20s, late teens, early 20s.
Oh, no, much younger.
She was already in the States at 18. So I think you were probably like 13, 14.
I was already at Lycée Marie Curie. But one thing I want to say, it is important, and you might be interested. After my grandfather was killed, the French police came to my house, my family's house, and asked us, would we like him to bring the army to that village that captured my grandfather and punish them.
Wow.
The reason why is that they should have alerted the French authority about my grandfather being captured. so they might kill him. We say no, because the people who killed my grandfather, they're gone. Only the villagers, innocent people remain.
Yeah.
So you want to kill innocent people. You don't want them to do that.
Because when you say punish, you mean kill them, right?
Yeah, that's what the army do, punish.
Yeah.
So we say, no, we don't want them to do it. But that was the policy of French army. If they don't report any crime, then you have to go into the place and punish people so that they report the next time.
Yeah. And what's amazing about that, and it seems like every imperial force that is somewhere that they've taken over, they always seem to make that exact same mistake, and that's not how you win the hearts and minds of anybody. So by doing that,
they're not interested in those days to gain the heart. They are not interested in those days to gain the heart. What is interest? The land and the resource that provides.
Yep.
The French are interested in South Vietnam because we produce a lot of rice, a very rich rice, and rubber. Rice fields and rubber plantation, they're the two main resources that we can offer to the French, and they want to keep it to themselves.
So when did you leave for the States, and what was did you go voluntarily is not the right word, but was your family forced to leave, or did you leave for school? Why did you end up deciding to leave Vietnam?
Well, I've mentioned I went to a French school, high school, and usually whenever what family could afford, we continued French education in France. And so I did my high school, get my degree, baccalaureate, and most of my family, my cousins who are older than I am, get their baccalaureate, and then they continue their studies in France. That's the tradition. And I was a black sheep, I guess. I don't want to go to France. I want to go to America.
Rebel.
Rebel.
Not a black
and
sheep.
There's nobody in my generation. You go to America, it's a big country. And
so you just left by yourself. You went by yourself.
No, can I tell this story? Can I tell it?
Okay.
No, this because you can't highlight just how incredible this was, Mom. That's why I want to do it, Brian. Can I do it?
Yeah. Yep.
Because this is the thing. So all of the older cousins went to France. So somewhere in her 16, 17-year-old mind, she decides she doesn't want to go to France. She wants to go to the United States. She sees some boys across town. I don't know who they were. Some boys that got a scholarship, right?
Friends or family.
Friends of the family, okay. Friends of the family who got a scholarship from a priest to go to the United States. Her family's not Catholic. She doesn't know the priest. She finds her way to the priest, somehow figures out how to get herself the same scholarship, somehow figures out how to get her single mother, who generally wasn't the most supportive person, to find the money for her airfare. So her mother had to ask her father, who was deceased friend, for money to pay for this. And then so Mom, at the age of 18, gets onto a plane, doesn't speak the language, gets onto a plane to go to college in Madonna College in Michigan.
And what year is this? Give me roughly.
1952.
1952. Okay.
I was 18.
To a Catholic school.
But I have to give credit to that program, because that program, mainly Vietnamese leaders come from that program. The program that Catholic priest in Belgium was sent by the Catholic Church to work with the Vietnamese bishop in Vietnam. And he had the vision that Vietnam will become independent one day soon.
Right.
So he wanted to have some Vietnamese trained in American system of government or politics. instead of just French train, those in train. So he foresee that. So he asked permission of the Vietnamese bishop to go to America and get in touch with Catholic college and university to grant scholarships for Vietnamese students. And that's how the program started.
So you get on a plane, 1952, head to Minnesota for college.
No, not Minnesota yet.
Right, it was Michigan.
To a Catholic
Michigan.
college.
Okay. So
in Michigan.
And then you learned to speak English there while you were at college.
Well, French school is pretty good. I had 4 years of English.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it.
At the lycée, I can spell the words, I can read, but I cannot pronounce.
You can't speak it, but
I
you could
can
read
speak
it.
it.
So, and obviously it sounds like there was already kind of a Vietnamese sort of pipeline going to that college anyway, because they were gearing up for you guys to go back to Vietnam once they got their independence and help with the government. Okay.
Were there more Vietnamese at that college, Mom, or was it spread different Vietnamese at other colleges?
I was one, and there's one girl who was 1 year before I. Only 2 Vietnamese at that college, Madonna College in Livonia. I looked on a map, I couldn't find Livonia in Michigan.
I bet that.
The other interesting thing about that, though,
that's
is
Detroit.
When that's coming full circle, but anyway, Detroit in the family. But the other thing is that you arrived and you actually didn't know any Vietnamese history, right? That you had to look up in the Encyclopedia Britannica Vietnamese history because you arrived you only knew French history.
No, well, when I arrived, being a foreigner, the American was curious, asked me, where do you come from? I say, Vietnam. They say, where is that? Is it in Europe? I say, no, that's Vienna. They say, South America? I say, no, that's Suriname. And so we play that game, and finally I say French Indochina. They say, oh, yes. Sound familiar. But there was no Vietnam War for the Americans in those days.
Not yet. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So the irony is that the American didn't know anything about Vietnam, invite me to talk to them about Vietnam. And I have no idea.
Wow.
Because I went to French school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had to go to the library and look at encyclopedia about Vietnam to tell the American.
That's amazing.
About Vietnam.
Your whole childhood was under French control. So that's all you knew.
All you do, you try to be as French as possible.
Yeah. God, that's fascinating. And that's the other thing that kind of getting back to that, the whole
that's
idea
how the
about
colonial
Ireland
system.
And independence. Go ahead, Dao. I'm sorry.
The colonial system is to train people to serve the colonial power.
Yeah. And that's the only way. That's the only way to maintain control, especially that far away from home. Is you have to make them like you and want to be like you.
I have to be fair. They did grant French citizenship to certain Vietnamese. You have to earn it. So that's a thing. But a few do.
And so you were
Vietnamese have French citizenship.
Okay. And so you were at Madonna College from 52 to roughly 56. And then
Yeah. Okay. But I changed.
Oh, okay.
You see, because at the college, the Madonna College I want to major in political science, but they have only sociology. So I asked the priest, would you find me another school where I can learn political science? So the priest said, okay. So he found a scholarship for me to go to Minnesota.
Okay. University of Minnesota.
They say there's a 9 months of war cold there.
Yeah.
And that was in Duluth then?
Yeah, in Duluth.
Oh man. That's Duluth, Minnesota is like the exact opposite of How Long Bay.
Exactly.
Yeah, like Superior. Not as many islands.
Oh man.
But they have 9 months of winter.
Yeah.
We'll say, okay.
You have like a weekend of summer.
And mom didn't have the right shoes. She had leather shoes, so fell all over campus before she got rubber soled shoes.
I love it. I love it. So did you go back to Vietnam then to kind of fulfill some kind of a contractual?
No, I didn't have enough education yet.
Gotcha. All right. So talk to me. So
Yes.
you finished undergrad and then what'd you do?
And I get my bachelor in 3 years instead of 4 years on scholarship. So I want to go to diplomatic course. So I study international law and diplomacy. I get a fellowship at Chicago University.
Okay.
Yeah. So I spent 2 years there to get my master's. No, 1 year and a half. I took 1 year to take classes and 1 summer to write my thesis. So I finished in 56.
Okay. And now this whole time while you're in the States studying, are you in touch with the people back in Vietnam in terms of, okay, when you get back, this will be your job, or was it not that structured yet?
No, because I was there to my mother, except that she send me sometime $50, for expenses. The rest was paid for by the college or the place where I live. The big brother, and big sister come provide me housing. They have members who would take me in, and I can stay with them, get room and board in return for some service, babysitting or whatever. So I didn't have to pay anything, for
But
my
I think
education.
I think what he was saying also was that there wasn't a structured, it wasn't as though you were in the States getting a certain level of education and then you could anticipate going back to Vietnam and walking into a job. Because I think one of the stories you've told us is how when you went back, so tell him what happened when you went back and you were looking for a job, right? You wanted to work in the diplomatic service.
Yeah.
And then,
But then, so I was at Chicago for a whole year, getting courses for my master and writing my dissertation. And then time for me to go home. And at the time, the US government is getting interest in Vietnam. So I was told that my return trip, the US government can pay my return trip to go to Vietnam.
Okay.
So I get in touch with them, and then I wait through the bureaucracy and so on. I wait in New York and get a temporary job to pay for my room and board until the ticket came, and it was a first class ticket. Yeah. So, but there's no job. They expect that I will find a job myself.
Gotcha. Yeah. So,
but then what happened? Wait, then what happened when you asked for a job there?
Yeah. So I received, I'm going to be in diplomatic on Vietnam because I did my study and being a woman and so on. So I went to the foreign ministry and asked for a job. And they say, no, we don't need women. So I say, okay, you don't want me, I don't want you.
Yeah.
So I get a job working with the government newspaper. They publish news every day, twice a day, in English, French, and Chinese, I guess, or Vietnamese. So I was the person who run that was also a returnee.
Gotcha.
And he knew me coming back, so he sent a card to invite me to. Then he offered me the job to be head of the English section of the.
Okay. And
so
was that in Saigon? Were you not? Okay,
Yeah.
You went back to Saigon.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you something real quick, Dao, before we hit that part of your career. So when you were back in the States, kind of learning a little bit about Vietnam, learning a little bit about the United States, was it? I mean, when you started to really learn about the history of Vietnam, was it just blowing you away? I mean, having grown up not knowing anything about this, I mean, I had to have been just kind of like.
Well, I know the tradition, but I don't know the political, the
Yeah.
general, the different king and so on, that
Right.
you visit the tomb, in your visit. So
Yep.
you see, I know superficially, what you learn from books and whatever uh, I can learn from the encyclopedia. But people ask me about the war. I say, well, I was under the French war. I'm not under the American war, so I don't have any idea. The American war, you see.
Yeah.
It was in 52 I was there. The American didn't get until later. But when I went back to Vietnam, with a ticket paid by the US government, I've met some Americans in Saigon.
Really. Right. And so this is this is 57,
They were
50.
observers.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Yep.
So they shook my hand. Well, once actually, I went with it was very hot for me. So I went with my aunt to go to the mountain to cool off. And one day there was a knock on the door, and there was this American with a broken car. Went in and tried to speak French,
Yeah.
that he need help. I say, yeah. So I told him he was flabbergasted. So
And now those,
woman in the hills speaking English, but we did help him.
yeah.
And
Now, are those
but
that early on, the American presence early on, that was probably a little bit of military, but more government, more CIA,
yeah,
more
that's
government, right?
Yeah. It's just very few. But the first man that shook my hand in Saigon told me I was the first Southerners that he ever met.
Really?
Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
You live in Saigon, but never met a Southern Vietnamese? Who is it? Really?
Huh.
And you can give a guess. Who?
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yeah. So you get back to Vietnam, you're in Saigon, you're working at the newspaper, and then now can you start to see things changing over there? I mean, obviously the French are gone now, so
Jim already there. President Jim.
okay.
You see, the irony is that Jim was put on there. Not too many Vietnamese knew him.
He was put there by the U.S., right?
Yeah, he lived in a retreat or something like that. And I think the Catholic Church, what's a bishop? Jean King, what is a well-known bishop? Is on TV over the Shin, Bishop Shin, and the Catholic Church recommend him to the U.S. government because he belonged to a Mandarin class, lived in central Vietnam, not in the south. And so the government the American government put him as the leader for Vietnam after the partition. Yeah. But we in the South, we don't know anything about him.
Isn't that amazing how that works? The Vatican seems to get their hands in all sorts of politics.
Because they're Catholic.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it, but they're strong. So we accept Mr. Jim, but most of us are not Catholic.
Yeah.
And then we figured out, like President Trump somehow, all the streets have been clear, so that his convoy can go visit where he is. And he act like he's a Mandarin, in the thing rather than what the American hope to be a democracy regime. But he's very strict. And
so he ruled South Vietnam like he was not as a democracy at all.
No, he's not South Vietnam. He lived in An Nam.
That's so he lived in the central part of Vietnam, but ruled over South Vietnam.
Yeah, but because the American put him after the South Vietnam and part of him because of division after the division, you see. So we don't know about him. Here he was put in.
Yeah. We
have no voice, but and he has his relative and his cohort and so on. So he was a Mandarin, but we don't know him. We didn't elect him.
Yeah.
We converted to Catholicism either. Only 10% of Vietnamese were.
Really? Okay. Yeah. And so now we're in the late 50s, early 60s, and things are definitely starting to ramp up. Is that because Ho Chi Minh and the guerrillas started to push back on his rule in the South? Is that basically how that all went down?
You heard the term Viet Cong.
Yeah.
Those are the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, who want independence.
Yeah.
And left the South, sneak into the jungle to fight with the communists for the independence. So many of people we know who want independence Vietnam just drop their job, smuggle into the jungle. And we have a say that he went to the jungle, she went to the jungle. That's
Meaning she went to the other side.
To fight for independence.
Yeah.
So they are the true people who want independence from France.
And were you ever pressured by friends or anybody to do that, or?
No, I was I was a teenager, but I know people, teachers, friends, who disappear one day.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, he went to the jungle. And we know that they joined the communists, the Viet Cong.
And was that happening? I mean, was it a lot of people? Was it like a flood of people leaving?
No, we have a strong security, the French security thing.
Yeah.
So it has to be discreet, otherwise the family will suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
At least at the time that was there. But they were Vietnamese thing who give communists in the South, in the village, who really give trouble to the government. So we'll always have soldiers and so on.
what was the North Vietnamese army called, which is different from the Viet Cong?
I think that's what they were called, the NVA, the North Vietnamese.
No, I think that's the difference. It's the NVA was the North Vietnamese army, and then the Viet Cong were the jungle. They're like guerrillas.
South Vietnamese.
Yep, exactly.
South Vietnamese. So it was an interesting.
Communist.
Yeah.
They were on the same side in the sense that they wanted the same thing, but I think they operated pretty separate from each other.
Yeah.
Right, so
we are not very friendly to it, but we have the same purpose. You see the South and the North.
Yeah.
Somehow, we speak different accent. We speak different kind of food.
Yeah.
The other thing I think, Mom, that you've mentioned to me recently several times in the past years is about how you have a lot of respect for the Northern Vietnamese because of their strong sense of independence. And Mom, you said to me like that in the South, you feel like the South Vietnamese were lazy because they depended on the French, and they were maybe cowards and it wasn't like a lot of people stood up and said, I believe in an independent Vietnam and I'm going to go.
Volunteers in the army in the South that you are forced to join the army. You see the difference because the South is very rich in resource. So you don't work very hard to have a good life. The Northern have very hard time because their place is very poor. We have a fish, we have the rice, we have a fruit. You don't have to work very hard. Life is good.
Yeah. Which in the big scheme of things, that's another one of the weaknesses of empire is you get too soft and you don't realize that there's people behind your house that can't stand you. Yeah. Wow. So now we're in the early 60s. Things are definitely starting to ramp up. I'm sure the violence is starting to increase. I'm sure you're starting to hear that all the time.
Yeah. With them, and you read in the newspaper, so on, the hamlets were armed and they moved village to save, but it didn't work. Yeah. So whenever after my work at the newspaper, the Michigan State University had a grant from the U.S. government to develop a police force, Vietnamese police force, and a part that they want me to involve is to study the economic, political, and social village.
Okay.
To get to know the Vietnamese people.
Yeah.
So I was being in political science, so I do actually, because of that, they have the office in Saigon, and I was the only Southerners, Vietnamese Southerners. So
Okay.
they chose me to go to the South to select a village, a Southern village, typical, so that they can do a study from economic, anthropology, and political.
You were hired by the U.S. government to do that.
Yeah.
And where did you go?
Michigan State University project.
Gotcha. Okay. And so where did you go? What village did you go to?
Well, I took a cargo and look at some village and say, look, this is safe for them to do the study. Otherwise, they will be kidnapped or something. So I talked to people, and some places not too far from Saigon, so you can go there and come back the same day.
Okay.
Overnight. Yeah. And so we did a study of that. Mine was public administration, somebody in economics, and actually one of my friends from University of Chicago did the anthropology study, Jerry Hickey. And
so what they do with that study?
Did
it make any difference, you think?
Box, pack it and put it there, and anybody who want to know about Southern Village things, what in economics things, they learn it. The irony is that when I was there, one of my relatives, my mother's cousin, who was a lawyer and was appointed by Jim to be the Minister of the Interior. And his house was near my school, and I was his wife, who's come from North Vietnam, and liked me because she was 16 when she married her. She brought her dolls with her to South Vietnam. And so when my school near her house, she told me, come and see her dolls. Anyhow, so we grow up, and her husband now is a minister, and I visit him sometimes, see what he's doing. And so I told him that I did the report of the village, or that particular village. He said, you know what? All the report that Michigan State University and other sent us, we put in a shelf.
Classic. Again, going back to the empire, at some point they lose interest in learning anything about it. At that point, you're just there to maintain the status quo. Nuts.
Yeah.
So when did was that kind of your first job?
And then somehow the U.S. aid agency. When I went in, I went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they say they don't have a job for me. And then later on, I say, well, if I don't get a job there, maybe I want to go back to the United States. So I asked about getting a fellowship to go to my PhD in the United States.
Okay.
And so I was told I wouldn't get one. So I chose to go to Columbia University for my PhD.
Gotcha. So what year is that?
60.
No, not 60, because that's when you got married, right?
Yeah.
So late 50s.
58.
Okay.
58.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but you see, the thing there is somebody I'm interested in Columbia, in New York.
Yeah.
Somebody she was interested in. Right.
Yeah. His name is James.
Was that who turned out to be her husband?
Yeah, we met at University of Chicago.
Okay. Yeah,
So they-
that was,
Years
I was actually
before.
gonna.
4 years before.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, so you okay? So you met. So you guys kept in touch for 4 years while you were back in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
2 years. It's 2 years you were back, right? They met at the University of Chicago.
2 years I was at Columbia, and he
Gotcha.
finished in medical school.
Okay.
Well,
Okay. Um,
So
uh,
we got married, and I broke my promise to
Which was
finish
what?
the degree, to finish the
Oh.
dissertation. And they didn't complain. They didn't ask me to prepay them back.
Really? Just that was it. Now, but that's not the end of your involvement with the South
No.
Vietnamese government.
No. But you see, I learned that to be an American wife, you have to support your husband. So I have to look for a job because he was still a medical student.
Yeah.
So I looked for a job.
And what'd you end up doing?
I look at them in the New York Times newspaper, and there's one group of church that want somebody to go interview people living in the Bronx, in the suburb around New York City. And at the time, I didn't know, but they have to go at dinner time, to Harlem and all this.
Yeah.
For me, I didn't know. But I did, and that was my contact with nonprofit organization that provides service to people.
Yeah.
So somehow I got involved with them, that to do something to get to know.
Well, I mean, think about it. It sounds almost exactly like what you were doing in Vietnam when you went to that village to do that census study.
Then I get hired. It's just, when I was in Columbia, I asked one of my professor, how do you go and get a job? He said, you have to pound the pavement. There's a new term that I learned. So I did pound the pavement, and I got a job at the place called the American Council of Voluntary Agencies for Foreign Services. This is a group of nonprofit organizations that include Catholics, Quakers, Mennonites, Oxfam,
Wow.
all the
Here.
organization that help people overseas, not
Gotcha.
inside.
Yeah.
So because I have my experience in internationally, and they focus on 3 areas to help other countries: disaster relief, the refugees, resettlement, and long-term development.
Okay.
So this is into my plan. I want to help.
Oh yeah.
Overseas and so on.
And
They are the one that the organization CARE.
Mm-hmm.
After World War II, CARE, that organization, that group found CARE to send package.
Yeah.
After World War II.
Wow. Okay. So this is starting to get good now, because I would assume at this point you start to get really busy with that job, because at this point now the war is starting to really pick up in Vietnam. So I'm sure there's now a refugee situation in South Vietnam. People are moving. Is that kind of what happened? I mean, did you start focusing on that?
Well,
and then
I get my training to deal with disaster relief, development, and refugee. Refugee at the time we have the Hungarian movement, not Europeans.
Yep.
The Czechoslovakia, but
I would.
Nothing in Asia yet.
Yeah, so I think, so when we were growing up, I think, so this would have been the 60s, late 60s and early 70s. When you traveled for work, you weren't going to Vietnam. So the first part of your career at the council was, she was working development at all these other countries. There were countries in Africa and South America. And that's where you got your your training and working in development, which you then later in the second half of your career applied to your own projects in Vietnam.
Yeah, but it prepared me because we work with UN agencies and the US government, because whatever project overseas, we need money from the US government, and we need collaboration with the UN agencies, you know.
Right.
So that would make it a more organized.
And a lot of her travel was to Washington, D.C., and you were involved with meeting Congress people, lobbying, preparing.
Definitely want to get into that. But real quick before we do, this whole time in Vietnam, were your siblings still there, or did you still have family there during the height of the war, or had they all left?
I don't have siblings. I'm the only child.
Okay.
But I have 13 cousins.
Gotcha. Okay.
Who went to France to continue their study.
Gotcha.
I'm the only one in America. I'm still the only one here.
And was your mother still in Vietnam this whole time?
Yeah,
Really?
but she remarried with a Frenchman later when I was in New York, in the United States. And then he was like Attorney General, French Attorney General in the colonies in Vietnam, and then they sent him to Ivory Coast and so on. So I just visit them.
Yeah.
But just to clarify, also your family was divided, I would say. So most of your educated, ambitious cousins had all gone to France and settled there, many of them. And then there were some relatives that were left in Saigon because they ended up coming. Remember, they came and they stayed with us in 75.
Yeah,
right?
Refugees, you know.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's right at the.
And one of them was a minister. He did study in France, engineer work back in Vietnam, and then he tried to send his family out to Vietnam in 75, and he stayed to make sure. He was a minister of public works, and to make sure that the Siamese people have electricity and water and so on.
Yeah.
So he got caught. He missed the helicopter. So he was in prison.
Oh, really?
That was a big story. So I don't want to gloss over that. So he was a civil engineer working in the government. Because they had privilege, he got his immediate family airlifted out. And he opted to stay to try to ensure that the city still had utilities. Yeah. And then he got captured and spent 7 years in a camp. Yeah. And that family and two of his sister's kids and his parents, all 12 of them, came and stayed in our apartment in New York.
So right? He's obviously survived those 7 years in camp.
He survives because he studied in France, actually we're the same age. And so his wife wanted to stay in the United States because she had a relative, but I say you have to go to France because I know France will recognize Vietnam before America.
Yeah.
So the chance for him to rejoin you better if you go to Vietnam.
Wow. And at that point, obviously, at that point, Saigon has been getting hit for the last 7, 8, 9 years. It collapses, the communists take over, and probably all those things that he was working on as a civil engineer probably just stopped, huh?
Listen, I want to ask you, were you in Hue?
Yeah, we did. We went to Hue.
Did you see the bridge?
Yep.
With the dragon?
Yes.
That's a bridge that he built in Hue.
Really?
Yeah, but not dragons. There's no dragon. It's just a normal curve thing.
Yeah.
Then recently they added the
gotcha
ornaments on that. But
yeah.
That's the boat.
So it's at the we're talking about that big bridge over that bay, right? Just north of Oh, I'll think about it.
But
Yeah,
but it is in way. It's
Yeah.
just one because I saw Vietnam, Vietnam Amazing or something like
Yeah.
that, and it
Yeah.
looked like the picture video.
That's great.
He specialized in road building and bridge building.
Okay.
He was a minister. He's in charge of whole ministry.
Because
And
my understanding was after 75, when the Americans are out, there's kind of a vacuum, and it kind of falls in, not as bad as it was in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, but it was pretty bad. I mean, they were taking anybody who was educated.
yeah, they're round
getting rid of
up. They go to,
Yeah.
and they took him to they all to go to the north,
Yeah.
and that cousin of mine was released after 6 years because he was trained in Vietnam, and his name, I told his wife to register his name as being studied in France. So when the foreign minister of France went to Vietnam,
Yeah.
he had that list, and my cousin was able to be released, and then
Gotcha.
he came to France to join his family.
Yeah. And so, I mean, since then, since 75, you have no familial connection anymore to Vietnam. Everybody's gone at that point.
My family is.
Yeah.
I get involved in politics and so on, and so I went back to Vietnam 40 times.
Okay.
Or 4 times a year.
Wow. Okay. So tell me a little bit about that. So that started, what was your job going back over? Was it to deal with the refugees, or was it?
I still work with that organization, but because there's not many Vietnamese in that area. So people who interested in helping refugees, they know me because I work in that area.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I become a very popular person.
The go-to.
Being the only Vietnamese in New York City.
Yeah. Wow.
And they're familiar, so they call, ask me this and that. And so I was able to help,
So
but it's just that how do I say that? There's so much to do, first of all, I went to Vietnam. Let me back up a little bit to talk about before the refugees movement, because at the time when Americans were involved in Vietnam, and a lot of people concerned about child care, children who were fathered by the Americans. By the way, I went to a conference sponsored by UNICEF in Saigon just before the fall Saigon, and there was a conference on children of Vietnam. A lot of Americans want to adopt children, and a lot of children also were fathered by him. And at this conference, one interesting item I learned, many of the children were not fathered by GIs.
Really? That's the common story.
That's right. That's false. That's false. Because the people who work with these children, with the mothers, you see, they know.
Gotcha.
Because, like my neighbor in the Marine, he was assigned in Quang Tri.
Yeah.
They're fighting all the time.
Yeah.
There's no big town, nothing.
Wow, that's.
So how he couldn't meet some woman to have a child or something. This was construction workers.
Engineers.
Yeah, they have more time.
Yeah.
You see, that's why. But the GIs always get blamed for.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Yeah. So, and okay, that's pretty fascinating. So you were helping them. Were you helping them get adopted by other families, or were those?
Well, you know,
I assume those
there's
guys aren't looking for their children.
there are two problems, two situations: the Amer-Asian children fathered by Americans, and then there's a thing about that orphanage full of children, orphans, that the parents put them there.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want to adopt them, you know. So, for example, the postman, every day they would bring me boxes of letters from Americans who want to look for adopt a child or for their children somewhere.
Yeah.
And there's no way I can do it. So I have a list of American organizations that deal with that, with this case, and then send it to them and try them to follow. But it was very, very, a lot of correspondence with that.
Well, and
and
also,
that's where a lot of interviews that I had with on TV that about the children.
Yeah. And this is also the time of the all of the Vietnamese boat people. That whole, basically, that whole movement to for the refugees to be basically resettled back in the United States, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think when you were talking about those boxes being delivered to your office, I think what you were saying was that it was Vietnamese, you know, mothers probably mostly saying, you know, my child looks like this. I've sewed my name into the sleeve of their coat, the clothing, or whatever.
I wrote the address on the skin.
Right, wrote the address on some
desperate.
Yeah.
But like thousands of letters that she was sort of inundated with.
Yeah.
And that's when you met Teddy Kennedy, and that was the Barbara Walters interview. It was like a lot of attention paid to that crisis, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's amazing because the guy out here in San Diego that the mechanic that we take our cars to is a Vietnamese guy, and he's basically my age, so he was probably 6, 7, 8, 9 years old on a boat leaving Vietnam, arrives in somewhere on the West Coast, and then is shipped over to I think he grew up in Oklahoma. Yeah. So I mean, think about that, just completely plucked out of Vietnam, grows up in Oklahoma. I mean, and it's a fascinating story because obviously he's doing great now. He's got a couple of.
The Americans has a very good system. They call it resettlement agencies. So they work with the State Department, and those organizations, like church, they have branches all over in different states. So they would select the refugees family and ask the branches to find home, jobs for those families. So it is very well organized.
So Dao, would you say that you were kind of spearheading that whole movement? I mean, was that all you?
Because there's two ways. There's one through the organization that I worked for. There was a committee on disaster, the committee on children, committee on refugees.
Right.
And so then I'm the one, actually, it started with that Senator Ted Kennedy was chairman of the subcommittee on children.
Okay.
And one day his staff called me and said, "Now, the senator wants to come and visit you." I say, "What for?" So I say, "Well, I talk about the children." I say, "Okay, when?" So he came and he was concerned about different children's situation, children to be adopted, children don't have Amer-Asian and so on. And he announced that he's requesting, I'm not sure, I thought it's $1 million or $3 million for those children that need to be taken care of in this country. So we had a conference on the children in Vietnam I attend, and that's where I found that the children something. It is complicated. First of all, the children are not citizens. Even the father by an American are not citizen of America, and there's no provision for them. And compared to the French example, for example, if a French soldier has a child with a Vietnamese thing, that child could become French citizen when he reached 18. And the mother and the child receive subsidies from the government while they live in Vietnam. Yeah. Or if the mother wants a child to go and live in France, the French government would take it and would be for of the state. And the mother staying near them gets some subsidy. It is totally different from the American thing. I learned a lot. And the other thing is that people who want to adopt children from orphanage did not know that it is a tradition of Vietnamese parents to take the child to the orphanage and leave it there because either they were too sick or they're too poor. And the orphanage would take care of the child until they are in position to come back and claim the child. But the people who want to adopt the children think these children are abandoned.
Gotcha.
And did not
understand.
Yeah. And the director of the orphanage also is not telling them the truth because it brings them money if they have a child adopted by a foreigner. It's all business, Yeah. And so some parents come back and say, well, my child, they say, oh, he was adopted.
And never to be heard from again. That's amazing.
Yeah. So many things happen like that because the director wants to have money and choose a good looking guy and say, here, this one.
So how'd that all work itself out? I mean, how'd you do during that time with all that?
I think one thing, I think one really good story is the one where you go, I don't know, was it your first trip back to Vietnam when you went to pick up the 11 Amer-Asian kids and their families? This is a good.
Yeah, the first trip of the Amer-Asian, the Vietnamese government willing to let these children leave. So they say these children are refugees. It has to be a group of American responsible people to come to Vietnam to receive them and take them back and place them or whatever to do. So I was part of that group to go. There were 11 children that the government let them out.
So you were in charge of it, though. You weren't just part of it. You were actually in charge of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other representative, like the Pearl Buck Foundation, World Vision, people who are engaged in adoption of children overseas. And so we had to sign the letter that we received 11 children and their companions, because they are not alone. They come with mothers, grandmothers, stepbrothers and sisters.
So they brought the whole families over.
But and that's part of the story that was so striking to me is when she describes being on the plane, landing in Hanoi. This is the first, she's now in North Vietnam.
Okay, so Kim mentioned that you, the first time you flew back to Ho Chi Minh City, when you landed on at the airport, things were kind of strange because the soldiers were all wearing the same uniforms. And talk a little bit about kind of what that feeling was like when you first flew back there.
Well, that was the first time I returned to Vietnam under communism. and I can see the guards, the soldier in their uniform, and it will bring me back to the time when I was in Vietnam, and I was very scared. I was afraid if I get out of the plane, they might arrest me. But I realized that they give me a visit, the visa
Right.
to go to pick up the children, so they wouldn't send me to prison.
Because
So
you were
calmed
actually
myself down.
at that point, you were representing the United States government, right?
Yeah, I and a group of people, children organizations, to go and supposed to pick up the Amer-Asian children. And so we were on the list, and we had to sign in that we agreed to take these children out.
Wow.
All 11 children and their relatives. And so we hope while we're in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, maybe we can get a chance to go and visit the town. Only
Really?
the airport, and pick up the children, get back on the plane to go back to the United States.
Really? That was it. It was, hey,
That's
get your
it.
job done and
That's
get out
right.
of here. Holy
But
cow.
they didn't take me to prison, so that's a great relief.
Yeah. And what was their reaction to you when you came? Were they obviously treated you as a representative of the United States, even though you were Vietnamese?
No, because my name is already approved,
Okay.
To be on the list. So
Right.
I'm not illegal. But I, being a Vietnamese, I thought maybe I could have a chance to go and visit Saigon.
Yeah.
So that's all right. They let me get on the plane again. So that's a relief.
And so that was the first group of kids that you brought back to the United States.
That's all right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what over the course of the years that you were dealing with that program, do you know how many Amer-Asian children you were able to bring back?
Oh, I don't, that was the thing, but they later on other groups of children who are especially have their organization has special program for the children. So the children will be taken care of by those organizations. I was only represent a group for the first time.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
And so now that was kind of one of your main programs that you were sort of heading up. And so we're talking, about 77, kind of late 70s right now? Is this around the time frame?
No, that was in 82.
82, okay.
Yeah, but then, since my name is connected with the children, so I got a lot of letters from the Americans or the Vietnamese in America who contact me and try to either connect with their children or adopt children. And so every day I would have bags of mail that the mailman came to my office. Of course, I cannot answer any of them,
Right.
but I did read some of them. Then I have a list organization that could help them to bring the children out. And I send down that list and they can contact them. But it is sad sometimes they say, the letters say, well, I wrote the address of my relative on the skin of the child. I hope that, he still has that address. And some, it is very sad, but many of them were able to make it through.
Yeah.
Not everyone, of course.
It's desperate times call it.
It is a sad time.
Yeah. Desperate times call for desperate measures sometimes, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then you'd mentioned that you'd gone back to Vietnam several times after that as well. In what capacity were you going back those other times?
It is very interesting. My focus was on the refugees, to help them to come and work to help to settle them different places and connect with relatives that they have and so on. And so I did my thing as a Vietnamese person to help my people.
Right.
Then, of course, the Vietnam representation at the UN changed because of the change of government. So the new government, the communist government, was sent another set of representative to work at the UN to represent Vietnam at the UN. And one of them, the head of it, happened to be in the school with me in a French school in Saigon.
Holy
So
cow.
I knew her, it was coincidence. So I got in touch with her and say, how is she doing? She need any help or not? And so we connect. And then I feel that, I help the people come
Yeah.
together there. But there are also my people still in Vietnam and have to live under a different regime. And it would be very difficult. It was a habit in the past that if the head of the member of the UN organization come to the September meeting of the General Assembly, then usually they invite some people from that country living in the United States to come and listen to the speech they made at the General Assembly. So I was invited to listen to the speech that the Vietnamese foreign minister to talk about Vietnam
At the UN.
General Assembly members.
Wow.
And that was the foreign minister, Mr. Winkatat. And he was very moderate and speak very heartfully about the problem that the new government faced in Vietnam, especially, because of the communist regime, there was not much resource and people were starving, So I feel very bad. And he would talk without the communist, propaganda or anything. It's just from the heart.
Yeah.
And it is hard to me to see a foreign minister of a country that come hat in hand and say, please come help my people.
Yeah.
I was very touched.
Yeah, and you had mentioned this earlier that really Ho Chi Minh didn't have a choice but to kind of align with Russia and China and the communist sort of life, even though I won't even speculate, but it's sad to see that all he wanted was to protect his people and freedom, and yet that particular form of government is doing what they were doing to the country after the war. I mean, it's kind of sad that
but
happened.
On the other hand, they supplied the Soviet Union and China supplied the arms for the Vietnamese to fight against the French and the South Vietnamese. So that's that part of the deal.
Yeah,
and
deal with the devil.
But then I found out that when I went back to Vietnam, the major assistance that China sent to Vietnam after the end of the war was the power that you add to food to make it more tasteable.
Yeah.
Accent, that kind of thing. That's one of the big aid that they sent to Vietnam, because to make it taste, they don't have much food, so something to make things taste better.
Right.
And you have to be careful to eat it because you don't want to be get that thing. It's not very good, it's not very healthy.
Yeah. So Dao, you mentioned something just a second ago, that the communist representative that came over from Vietnam was a girl that you grew up with and went to school with. So the question that I have, I find this fascinating, is, so she grew up under the French rule, kind of French, European, however you want to describe that. And then as a grown-up, she's part of the communist party. And then she comes over to the United States and sees how that's lived. What was her take on all that?
Well, she was a member of the communist government because she stayed. Yeah. Although, the French school gone a long time ago, and she support the communist cause. Yeah. And that's why they sent her to the UN, because she spoke French and maybe English and with her work. So I just, for old time's sake, I say, well, come and say hello.
And she probably, the ruling party, she probably had a very comfortable life there, I would assume.
No, you know what? The mission that the Vietnamese sent to the UN, they have to live in an apartment.
Really?
And work there. They live there and work there.
Really?
They don't have money. And even the the foreign minister, later I learned that he doesn't have many suits. You know, when he was then sent to something, you go to the foreign ministry uh, place, and then you pick the suit that fit you. And then you were to go to sing. And one time we felt bad, so we got him a different tie.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, they have nothing.
Yeah.
You know, even diplomat, it's just they for the war.
Yeah.
Like that, you know.
So the 80s, 75 to, let's just call it 95, when they raised the sanctions. I don't remember the exact date, but for those 20
embargo,
years.
they left the embargo first.
Embargo, that's right.
Bush left embargo.
And that was what, 90? That was the mid 90s, right?
And the last year of President, first President Bush.
Okay, so right at 90 then. Okay, 1990-ish.
But that's only the embargo, not the recognition, the establishment of the relationship which is under Clinton.
Gotcha. Okay. And so for those 20 years, Vietnam was in a bad way. It was communist Vietnam. It was, the people were suffering. And did you go over towards the end of that when they lifted those embargoes? I mean, did you see were you there to kind of see the transition?
I went there before, because not only the embargo, but also this, just because the communist system is very strict, and so people don't have enough food even then. That's why that foreign minister came to make the appeal at the UN, and there are 3 or 4 American non-profit organization, we call it NGO, like the Quaker, the American Friends Committee,
Right.
Mennonite Central Committee, maybe Oxfam. Those don't receive, they don't accept American government money, but for charity, for things, they send they raise their own funds and send some food to Vietnam. So they keep the connection with that. And so they still there, and I invite a group of them for the foreign minister when he was there to talk to them. And also I was on the President Council of Asia Society in New York. And I know the president very well, so I told him, you know, the foreign minister of Vietnam is very interesting. Why don't you invite them to talk to the members?
Right.
So he did. And to make it easier for him, I say, I can guarantee you that he is the only foreign minister, communist foreign minister, who has a good sense of humor. You know, because they all very tense, and you know, when he talked about their politics, and you know, they don't mean, but he's very relaxed and very.
So let me ask you this: do you think he was only very relaxed and enjoying himself when he was outside the country, and probably not when he was back in Vietnam?
I don't know. Because I didn't witness his meeting with his other phone.
Right.
But in the end, it is very interesting because he was not approved by the Central Committee, the Communist Party Central Committee, because he was against the government to be more closer to China.
Oh, interesting.
No.
Yeah.
But interesting enough, his son is now the Vietnamese foreign minister.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
At one stage, one of his children, we became very close. My husband and I think he's a very good person, even he thinks he's communist. Yeah. But he's really interested in the market society, capitalism. Yeah. So we give him a subscription to The Economist to deliver in Hanoi, so he can read English.
Right.
And yeah, so you know, it is. And each time I went to Vietnam, my husband would get some economic books, American economic
Yeah.
books, to give to him so he can learn. You know, he's open mind.
Yeah.
Because he knows we have to deal with capitalist country. So he had to learn, you know, how they did.
Well, that's kind of this is kind of a great way to sort of kind of finish it off here, round it out the conversation. That is, well, I guess the first question would be: did you go over after the embargo was lifted? Did you go over at all in the '90s or no?
I went over before the
Gotcha.
embargo
Okay.
because I somehow, you know, I'm not registered as anti-communist because I have, you know, the connection and but I have to tell you one incident that would be interesting. I have a group of American organizations who are interested in going to Vietnam to help for voluntary agencies, to help for aid, you know, humanitarian aid.
Right.
And so I got to Vietnam the first time. I stayed at that big hotel in Hanoi, you know, near the lake. It was a French hotel, but it was the mouse running all over the. So
really?
Yeah, only the Cuban can say that.
Yeah.
Or, you know, and some other foreign journalists. So I was the only one here. But anyhow, if I want to see the foreign minister, I just pick up the phone and call the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Right.
And I say, can I have an appointment with the foreign minister? He say, yes, when do you want to see him?
Wow, that's great.
But anyhow, that aside, but it is interesting that because I was the only Amer-Asian, American, Vietnamese American who came there. So I stayed at the hotel one day and the people at the staff told me that there are two friends who want to meet with you at 9 o'clock in the evening. I say, I don't have any friends, but okay.
Yeah.
And so at 9 o'clock, the desk called me and say, the friends are here. I don't have any friends there, but anyhow, they consider. So I went down to the thing and met two men I never know. So I say hello, and they introduce themselves. They say, we are the security people, Vietnamese Communist security. And they asked me, am I afraid? So I say, well, when you say that, I am going in my mind, what have I done wrong that you have to come and see me?
Right.
And so I can't come up with anything at all. You know, they say, we just want to talk to you because we don't know what's going on. We're our people in America, and you are the first one that comes.
Holy
so we
cow.
want you to talk to us. And what them send down, you know? So I said, okay, I will tell you about how my colleague, my friends in the United States doing. They're okay. You know, they have job, they work hard, and so on.
How long did you talk to them for?
Oh, I don't know, a couple hours, something.
Really?
Yeah.
In the hotel lobby?
Yeah, at the hotel, and they say goodbye, you know, thank you for your information. That's it. They didn't get me to prison. So I was relieved. But then I made the point that when I leave Hanoi, I call them up and say, I'm leaving. So I just want to let you know.
Yeah.
And then I told the State Department, say that next time I go to Vietnam, I'll let you know when I'm going, how long I am going to be there, and what I'm going to do. So everybody knows I know. So whenever I return to Vietnam, I call them, these two men, and say, I'm here for such a length. I'm going to this and this province. If you have any question, let me know. So they know what I'm doing.
Right.
But one thing that I think it would be interesting to talk to you, that's a human thing. I live in New York, and one of my doorman was a Vietnam vet. Okay. And he knew that I'm going to Vietnam occasionally. So one time he say, Mrs. Spencer, could you do me a favor? I said, when you go to Vietnam, I say, yeah. He said he has in a room in his apartment in New York that things from Vietnam that he saved.
Right.
And what he missed that he didn't bring back from Vietnam is a pair of what they call Ho Chi Minh sandals.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what it is?
Yep.
Okay. I say, well, I've seen them in the store in the marketplace. I'm sure
Yeah.
I can bring back to you. So I did. And I go back to Vietnam and look at all the market. I couldn't find any Ho Chi Minh sandal. I was very disappointed. So the last day that the security man came to say goodbye to me, I say, you know what? I've been looking for the Ho Chi Minh sandals for a long time for my doorman, and I couldn't find it. They used to be, but well, what happened to them? They say, well, did you go to that market? I say, yeah, I did, but I couldn't find it. So I say, can you go and get it for me? He say, okay. So they went and get it, brought back a pair and handed it to me, but with a sheepish smile. I say, you know that it is called Ho Chi Minh sandal, but it was made in China.
Oh God. Oh
It is
gosh.
unique.
Yeah.
It is so funny, you know, that an American vet want to have a souvenir Ho Chi Minh sandal, and we couldn't have it, have to buy one made in China.
Oh man.
That's one of the irony that
Yeah.
my experience had.
That's a classic story. So when I went over there last year,
Yeah.
my dad is also a Vietnam vet, and he spent his time when he was over there in Saigon. And so when I went over there, he gave me this list. He said, go check out this place and this place. I think you'll like it. And that was from 1969. When you go over to Saigon now, there's modern skyscrapers. I mean, it is unbelievable. And so I unfortunately I sent him an email. What's that?
We should go back. I didn't recognize it when I looked Vietnam.
It's
amazing.
Yeah, Dao, it's unbelievable.
It's a different country.
Yeah, but you also the dichotomy is amazing. It's that gorgeous new construction, modern buildings, and then you have 1 million people on the streets in motor scooters. Just like you probably remember back in the day. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more people than there was back in the 60s and 50s, but the transition that country has made within the last 20 years is unbelievable. And I think, well, and you can see it, my personal impression was that's just all of from what I understand, as soon as the embargo and the relations were lifted and normalized, the Chinese and the Japanese just flooded into that area. And so now you literally have, and I didn't necessarily see it in Vietnam, although I'm sure it's there, but when we were in Laos and Cambodia, the Chinese, the construction that they're doing right now, it's just unbelievable. I mean, these gorgeous new modern looking railroad bridges across the Mekong River. I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on there. And so, it's fascinating to talk to you, because not only did you grow up in sort of pre-communist, communist Vietnam, but then while you were back here in America, you were representing our government, doing a lot of work with the communist country. And then now to be able to see it, what it is today. I mean, that's just, how is that for you to kind of handle that?
I feel very proud of myself that I was able to do. I was lucky. I'm not smart or anything, but because I feel that we have so much war, since World War II until 1975, the Vietnam people have lived war, all this war.
Right.
And now that is so, there's no more war. Even we have communism, still it is good, in general. So if I could, I try to help whatever I could to make it a bit better for the people to live in it. That's only my purpose. And I was lucky enough to be able to make the connection. And I formed partners with the I had two meetings at the White House under Clinton about normalization in Vietnam. Yeah. So, my little way, whatever I could, I tried to make the connection that the war is over.
Yeah.
And I think the Vietnamese need a lot of assistance, especially if, we come in America, and America have good already organization to work in Vietnam. So that's was my luck to be at the same place at the right time.
Well, I tell you what, Dao, your little contribution is rippled throughout that part of the world, and it's still being felt, I'm sure, which is amazing. So this has been great, Dao. Thank you very much.
Oh, you are very welcome. I'm glad it turned out that way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're a fascinating individual, and just goes to show you what one person can do.
Well, I'm glad I had that opportunity.
Yeah.
And I was here. I didn't plan all this, but it just happened, and I'm glad I did something useful.
Yeah. Well,
and
thank you very much.
I have to say I have a lot to help. Well, including my husband.
Yeah.
Who was very good.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dao, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure. And for somebody who is very interested in history, I love learning about the little things that don't make the textbooks, but have massive influence in certain parts of the world. So thank you very much, Dao.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Hey, guys, let me finish off by saying this. And this is kind of my own way that I sort of finish off all my podcasts, Dao, is if you're in the military, the police departments or the fire departments or the first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe, and Merry Christmas, everybody. And Dao Spencer, thank you very much for your time. This has been great.
Thank you. I'm very lucky to have opportunity and have a good family.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. All right, Dao, I appreciate it. Everybody, this is the Rain Man. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, Observations on the World We Live In. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.